Welcome to another biblically based look into today's news from Christian Voice New Zealand. Now here's Mike Bain.
Hi, I'm Mike Bain from Christian Voice New Zealand. You know, at the beginning of the year, the Speaker of New Zealand's Parliament, Trevor Mallard, for once was right on the money when he suggested New Zealanders needed to stock up on food essentials. Now, Mallard, a man who likes to play his music loud and water the lawn while he was doing it, was referring to an overseas trend which seen food shortages and supply chains being disrupted because of the outbreak of Omicron. In New Zealand today, we see lots of empty shelves at the supermarket and think, oh yeah, it's because of Omicron, or it's because of the war in the Ukraine, or as the government will have you believe it, it was because of 9 years of neglect from the previous national government. But that's not the real reason. When I mentioned in an earlier podcast warning of an emerging global food crisis several months ago, many assumed that I was exaggerating things. Sadly, I wasn't exaggerating one bit. As I mentioned last year, China is stockpiling grain, and so is Israel, who have learned from the lessons of the past when Egypt, under the direction of Jacob, spent 7 years stockpiling food for the following 7 years of famine. They were pretty wise. Today we see the price of fertiliser as an example soaring. Extreme global weather patterns, shocking crop failures and an epic global supply chain crisis has combined to create a perfect storm, even before the war in Ukraine began. Of course, the war has made things far worse because Russia and Ukraine collectively account for about 30% of all worldwide wheat exports under normal conditions. Now, for a while, the mainstream media and our leaders in Wellington have been in denial about what was happening. But now everybody is finally admitting the truth. In fact, at this point, shortages are causing rising prices, and an opinion poll has seen the Ardern government acknowledge that troubled times are on their way, but they've fallen short to conceding that a global food crisis is here. But don't worry, they'll catch up. But the White House recently confirmed they expect certain parts of the world to suffer a food shortage as an effect of the Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of the Ukraine. Speaking at the daily White House press conference recently, the press secretary Jen Psaki said that the Biden administration anticipates that higher energy fertiliser, wheat and corn prices could impact the price of growing and purchasing critical food supplies for countries around the world. I just wish our politicians were talking about this. You know, it might get a lot more people to understand the seriousness of the crisis that we are now facing. According to Psaki, the poorest parts of the planet are expected to be affected the most. She said food shortages were not expected to hit the United States, but rather countries in Africa, the Middle East and Southeast Asia. This is what I've always said. Those at the bottom of the economic food chain will be hit the hardest at first. But hang on, New Zealand's a food-producing nation and we're already feeling that pain too. One of the primary factors that is causing this new global food crisis is the price of fertiliser, which we mentioned, but that's doubled in the past 18 months. Now, the bigger problems are fertiliser and energy. We saw in the news of a New Zealand farmer speaking about having to pay as much as 3 times the amount a year ago to fill his harvester. And it's not just the energy price to run the tractors, but to run the trucks, to run everything else. And the price of phosphorus, potassium and nitrogen. Those are the 3 major things we use to make fertiliser. This is causing so much stress on the farmers that farmers all around the world are not planting their fields. How long will it be before we see the same thing happening with New Zealand farmers? At this point, we're still eating food that was grown last year, I know. But by the end of the year, we'll primarily be eating food that was grown this year. And this year, a lot less food will be grown than originally anticipated. You know, David Beasley, the Executive Director of the World Food Programme for the United Nations Agency, which feeds 125 million people a day, imagine that. He said Ukraine has only compounded a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe. He said there's no precedent even close to this since World War II. Now, Beasley has no idea how he's going to be able to feed everyone. But here in New Zealand, most will not start paying attention until it starts to affect them personally. But the good news is that nobody in this country is currently facing starvation. But without a doubt, the cost of food is going up. And you can see it for yourself at the supermarket. I mean, $9 for a cabbage, $7 for a cauliflower, and $3 plus a litre for petrol. Needless to say, this is just the beginning. Like I said, we're still eating what was previously harvested. But by this time next year, things are going to be looking completely different. If you want to be ahead of the curve, I back Trevor Mallard's recommendation about stocking up at your local supermarket while you still can. Now, I know that food prices might seem high, but the truth is that they're never going to be lower than this ever again. So take advantage of these food prices while they're still available and reasonable. There has not been a global famine in any of our lifetimes, so we don't know what that would look like. But here I am, warning that if the situation doesn't turn around, hundreds of New Zealanders, that's right, hundreds of New Zealanders will be experiencing famine-like conditions by the end of this year. Hopefully I'm wrong, but what if I'm not?
Thank you for watching. Help us to spread this message by sharing it within your own network. For more information, jump online to our website, christianvoicenewzealand.com.